Hey, what's going on, YouTube? Hope all is going well. Welcome to another episode of the Great Black Speakers podcast, where we connect through conversation. I'm your host. I'm Lawrence Watkins. I am the founder and CEO of Great Black Speakers. I'm also the president and chief operating officer of the Black Business School. Today, we're connecting you with Derrick Johnson. Derrick is one of the founders of Encounter AI, and what they do is use artificial intelligence to make the restaurant industry faster, friendlier, and more efficient. So he's going to share his story with you today. He's also going to give you some tips regarding, I guess, the future in terms of where we're headed with artificial intelligence. So Derrick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So let's just jump right into it. Can you tell the audience, a little bit about yourself and your background, and also how did you get into the artificial intelligence field?
Definitely. So, Derrick Johnson, born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. Academic background, Marquette University out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and then professionally did some consulting for big global four consulting firms, in particular where I worked in their organization, which was tasked with figuring out the implications of artificial intelligence, machine learning, the Internet of Things, which is basically devices, and how that would disrupt the future of work. And so when I started there, two things popped in mind, right? Was one, what does this mean for people like me? But then two, what are industries that I was aware of that this could potentially be leveraged in? And so from there, I also was running a restaurant franchise at the time and consulting for a very large franchisee. And so I saw that the two worlds can blend together, right? That I could bring a technology like artificial intelligence, or what most people would know as voice assistants, to an industry like the fast food industry and make those worlds work. So.
Perfect. So you went from corporate in terms of doing consulting to specifically entrepreneurship and franchising and restaurants and all these different types of things. Let's talk a little bit more about your corporate background and your corporate career. What are some of the things that your corporate career taught you in terms of being an entrepreneur now, in terms of transferable skill sets?
Definitely. In terms of transferable skill sets, I would say corporate taught me how to think, intrinsically about a business model. One of the things that we had to do specifically was make sure that there was, essentially capital at the end of the business opportunity, right? So the unit that I was in, we would go over a variety of business applications with the intent that if they didn't have a return on investment for the company, they weren't anything that we should be investing in or pursuing, right? And so that was the first thing that I kept front and center when I looked at a business to start myself, was how to make sure that the business was something that someone wanted, that it had a runway to go to market, and then three, that there was a way to actually make this a reality, right? And with those three things, that's what I kind of learned from the corporation, was that, your bets, only 1 in 10 of them are going to work. Only 1 in 100 are actually going to give you a true return on investment. So you always want to start from something that has a lot of legs.
Got you. And you hear a lot about people, or you hear about some people making that corporate to entrepreneurial, transition. Can you talk about how it's been for you, being on one side of the fence in terms of being in front with a large organization, to going now and starting your own business? Like, what are some of the key lessons that you've learned?
Key lessons I would say is, moving from a corporate environment. And in corporate environment, it's typically that top-down structure, right? So for the most part, unless you're senior leadership, C-suite, there are directives that come to you, and your job is to execute on those directives. On the entrepreneurial side, for the most part, you're running the show, right? And so how you choose to go to market, how you choose to do product development, the meetings you choose to take versus the meetings you choose to postpone, so on and so forth. They all have externalities that either benefit your business or destroy your business, right? And so because you're in a lot more control as being an entrepreneur, the end goal is to make sure that you're making the best decisions every day, right? And from a corporate perspective, you're on quarterly reviews, you're on yearly reviews, so on and so forth. And so those implications aren't as impactful as they are when you're running your own business.
Got you. So we hear a lot about this concept of artificial intelligence and AI. And, obviously you thought there was market opportunity for you to venture into this space a little bit more. And I think there's confusion in terms of what artificial intelligence really is and how it's going to have an impact on our lives moving forward. So can you give the audience a little bit of background in terms of what is artificial intelligence, and also maybe even talk about how it's different than just a simple algorithm that we're used to? And then, what are the implications of artificial intelligence in our lives moving forward?
Definitely. So I try not to use the term artificial intelligence. It's fairly loaded, and I try not to say machine learning just because it's a technical term. How I normally describe it in layman's terms is that it's a system of prediction, right? And so what you're capable of doing with the system of prediction is using it in a rote process such that you can solve a business problem that you historically couldn't solve, right? So when most people say artificial intelligence, the idea is that you're using computing power to replicate capabilities and mental faculties that humans often portray, right? So an idea of prediction of what we're doing in the drive-thru industry, for example, is that we're using your order to predict what you want, right? And so using your voice, we've built an algorithm and artificial intelligence around that to predict what you actually want it to order, right? The computer itself doesn't know what, a Big Mac or a Whopper or a Baconator is, right? We're teaching it that. And then after we teach it that, it can accurately predict what you want, right? And so when we go back into, for example, self-driving cars, right? Which is artificial intelligence that most people are familiar with and have heard about. That car, when it's driving down the road, is trying to predict whether it should go left, whether it should go right, whether it should accelerate, whether it should brake, right? Those are the core predictions around that process. From there, then it gets taught additional information, right? Can I predict where this person is going to go? Is this person going to run in front of my vehicle, or are they going to stay at the stoplight? Does the light have a higher propensity to change to red before I go through it, or is it going to stay green, right? Those are all of the predictions going on. And so artificial intelligence at its core is just that system of prediction. And then how we apply it in practice is that you're trying to figure out business problems that you can solve inherently by using large amounts of prediction, right? So for example, in healthcare, it may be the propensity to say, are you going to have a heart attack, right? We know for sure that most people that don't know the symptoms of a heart attack, but okay, if you have a wearable, potentially we've placed an algorithm in that wearable that now has the prediction power to figure out, are the experiences that you're going through, do they resemble a heart attack, right? And then that prediction now becomes a flag that gets pushed to say, okay, hey, you may now be having a heart attack, right? Same thing with cancer detection. You're going through images of individuals that historically have had cancer. You're using that to create a data set, and then now you can predict with a higher accuracy of humans, or with a higher accuracy than humans, whether or not that person is likely to have cancer based upon that imagery, right? So those are a few use cases where people are using artificial intelligence today and how they're using that power.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So because, the concept, it seems like, of big data and artificial intelligence go hand in hand, where you have these really large data sets and you look for patterns, amongst that data to, I guess, accurately predict what's going to actually happen in the future. And, there are different companies that are doing this in so many facets of life now. So, my cousin and my friend Demetrius, shout out to you guys next week. They're in Y Combinator, and they're doing that with weather. Yep. You have other individuals doing it in just, many facets of life. Can you talk about, I guess, even more so, this being maybe the next wave of like technology? Because the last wave, it seemed to be, you had companies like Airbnb, you had companies like Uber that provided these network effects. And built these, huge, humongous networks of, buyers and sellers, of people, who wanted to, rent a house, and people who wanted to be the renters of a house, and so on and so forth. And it took out the middleman and made for a frictionless economy, right? Mm-hmm. So can you talk about even a little bit more in terms of artificial intelligence being the next big disruptor? Like, so what is so important or valuable about this predictive analytics in that, like, I guess, separates it from previous generations of predictive analytics?
Right. So the easiest analogy I have is, if you kind of go through the boom and bust cycles of history, right? Like we went from steam, we went to kind of locomotive power to electricity. And then we skipped and now went to like a knowledge generation era, right? Where it's like people are using their minds. When we now look at how artificial intelligence is disrupting those things, for the most part, we've seen it go from where you had human brute force to machine assisted brute force to augmented brute force with like machine power, right? And so now when we skip this generation and we're going towards what does this mean for us? They call it industrial age 4.0, but the idea is that you're now able to provide scalability to things that humans have historically done that may or may not require that same level of effort, right? And so to give you just a few examples, you know, when you think in terms of like a train, right? Like the train has went through a variety of iterations where it was, you know, kind of coal powered, then steam powered, now it's electricity powered. And through each one of those jumps, there is a level of efficiency gained from that environment, right? The core apparatus was that, yes, you're going from location A to location B. However, what changed was that it was a lot more efficient for this activity to happen. When we now look at artificial intelligence, specifically in the terms of it being applied to the future of labor and the future of work, that same level of efficiency is going to be applied, right? So, you know, I always call it a proverbial Iron Man suit. You know, Tony Stark is capable of saying, okay, hey, you know, give me this component or this component, and they're now empowered and have a particular skill set to apply it to each type of job, right? So for fast food, you may now have a particular suit that you're putting on that allows you to do things that are particularly in that domain. In healthcare, you now may have a particular artificial intelligence enabled suit to put on, right? To now give you those superpowers, right? And the idea is that once each person has that capability, a lot of the overlap is probably going to be reduced, right? You know, the idea is that a lot of the impacts of artificial intelligence may be deflationary more than inflationary because we're reducing the amount of effort required to get the same outcomes that we have today. And that's why it's very important for people to understand the space, because historically we've always seen that with the increase of capability, there was almost a one-to-one increase of labor or one-to-one increase of assets, right? So you mentioned the Ubers and the Airbnbs, right? Like they didn't make any more cars to do this capability. They didn't build any new houses, right? They took existing inventory and repurposed it. And I think we're going to see the same thing with artificial intelligence going forward across a variety of industries and verticals.
Got you. I think my connection got weak there for a second, but I definitely heard what you were saying. So just for people who are tuning in, I am with Derrick Johnson right now, and Derrick is the the co-founder of Encounter AI. They are an AI or artificial intelligence company that is disrupting the restaurant industry, especially with fast food, to make it friendlier, faster, and more efficient. So Derrick has been giving us just a little bit of background in terms of his life story and his story with his career, as well as just artificial intelligence in general, which he doesn't like to use that term. He likes to use machine learning or some other term to describe what it is that they do. So I want to jump back into your, by the way, like, share, and subscribe, of course. So if you like this video, press the thumbs up button, please share, and also subscribe to our Black Financial channel as well. So Derrick, I would like to jump more back into, I guess, your company in terms of the origin story of it, right? So you started it with another Black man, is that correct?
Yeah, my co-founder, Kabak Kanda. We went to high school together. And then within the last few years, I moved out to the Silicon Valley area, and I had this idea that I've been kind of muddling for the last few years, and I had got it to a point where I needed help. And, I had knew of his work. We previously used to do music and videos together in high school, and so just brought that relationship forward to understand, how do we now transform an industry? And I gave him the idea. I remember he mulled over it for a few moments, and at the time, we were applying to some of the notable accelerators in the country. And I'm like, hey, man, I'm about to jump off this cliff. You want to go along for the ride? And then, he came back and he was like, I'm ready, man. And so that was kind of the genesis between Kaba and I in getting this off the ground. And so, fortunately, we've raised venture capital. I think that puts us in, the 1% of the 1% on the face of the planet. But it's a joyous time. And so we're continuing our efforts to bring this product to market and going from there.
Got you. So you guys met in high school. How did you guys keep that relationship going? From high school, a lot of people lose connection with their high school classmates. What was it in terms of your connection that kept you, saying, hey, I may want to work with this guy, 5-10 years later?
Definitely. So we started both. So in high school, I used to compose music, right? So I used to have a recording studio at my house. And all of the neighborhood guys from high school would come by. We would make music together. And Kaba was on the media side. So he was on the video production side. And so we had an artist that we were working with to bring his vision to life. And, for me, I'm a creative at heart, right? And so I love operating with other creatives. I love blending the intersection of creativity as well as technology, right? And he was a person that I knew who had that same mentality, right? Very self-motivated, self-starter, someone you can give an idea to and they're going to come bring back the results. And so for me, because I was doing the startup, I needed somebody who had that gust, that grit, that kind of win all, because that's the world that we're operating in, right? Few friends. And so the idea there is that it's going to be rough. It's going to be tough. You need somebody who you can talk to. You need somebody who potentially you have strong communication style overlap with, or whether it's complementary or contradictory, right? So that when things get difficult, you all know how to solve it and you have the communication modalities to solve it. So.
Got you. So how is it being a Black founder in Silicon Valley doing AI? Is it a lonely experience? Is it an experience that, it opens up a lot of opportunities, a lot of doors? Like, how do you feel about being a Black founder in Silicon Valley doing something that's so cutting edge?
It's pretty impressive. Like I have an immense network, right? So shout out to Dev Color. That's an organization of Black engineers in the Bay Area.
Shout out to Mac and Day.
Yeah. So Dev Color member.
House.
Then I've also done just mentoring, right? Integrating my artificial intelligence and machine learning background from consulting. I was able to work with VC firms and organizations to get myself out in the community, right? And so the gift is that you're one of a few, right? And so when you show up to these institutions, when you show up to these events, you automatically stand out. The curse of course, it's hard, right? We kind of understand the odds are against us from being entrepreneurial just in general. I think 1 in every 100 may succeed. But then more importantly, as an African-American founder, Black founder, what you're trying to do is often different because you aren't seen as the thought leaders in that space, right? When you don't have the big brands and the big schools and things like that, it's hard, right? And I know other founders in my network, Black founders in my network, who have those same Stanford and MITs and Harvards on their resume, and they have issues as well, right? And so the only thing I can say is that for our unique story, we're very fortunate, right? Because we were able to do things that most founders dream of. And more importantly, what I realized personally is that it's a very network-driven business, right? So the thing that I learned from consulting that I always tell people is very transferable is that you learn how to network, you learn how to build relationships that aren't transactional, and you learn how to leverage those relationships long-term, right? And so people see you as complementary, I was at a recent conference a few weeks back and met a startup out of the Chicagoland area. Few women doing some great things, right? And as I mentioned, I used to be a former mentor at a VC firm, right? And so I was able to connect those gaps, right? And so being able to play those multiple roles for me speaks volumes, because the doors that I open, I try to bring other people with me, right? And that's one of the valuable things of being out here in the Valley, is that once you have those relationships, you can leverage them how you want to.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned the concept of opening doors. because I think that's very valuable, and that's a great thing in terms of just providing opportunities, because you're one of the I guess founders, or the front people in terms of just coming in on the front end of a new technology. But at the same time, it's still important for our community to have the skills necessary to take advantage of those opportunities. Can you talk about some of the skills that you need to even get into artificial intelligence, right? I mean, I guess you're on the business side, your co-founder is probably on the technological side. Can you talk a little bit more about the skill sets needed to even start a company within this space?
Oh yeah, so definitely. So just front and center, we're both on both sides. Both my co-founder and I are both technical as well as business, which also gives us a unique advantage. But in terms of skill sets, I often say, you know, my father was a big sports fanatic, right? He could quote, stats up and down, right? That mindset, if you're quoting things that happened 15 years ago and you're going to, Jordan's shot percentage was, this many decimal points, that's the same math that's used to do artificial intelligence, right? It's no difference. I just think for the Black community in particular, we haven't had these opportunities, right? You can have guys that go to baseball games and they can quote every player and they can quote, stats year over year, things of that nature. Again, these same fundamental mental faculties are the skills that people are using in these high demand fields, right? Of course, it's math. Like I mentioned, it's the power of prediction, right? And so essentially, as long as you can take data and within some probability figure out the propensity of that data leading to a correct answer, that's kind of the core around artificial intelligence, right? The nuance of it is much more complex, but at the core, what you're trying to do for machine learning and artificial intelligence is make a sound prediction, right? So, the irony is, I would say, it's no different than that guy that that's always getting the lottery numbers, but never plays, right? Or no different than the person that's going to the betting track and magically they have a higher percentage than the person that's losing all of the time, right? Like, we see these flash points in our community and we don't acknowledge them for what they are, right? Which is just great prediction power, right? And so that same predictive power is and fundamentally drives what most people are doing when they apply technologies like artificial intelligence. And so just to give you kind of a discrete path, most comp sci, you're going to get entry-level machine learning these days. There's courses online like Coursera and other things where you can go and figure out whether or not you want to try the artificial intelligence pathway. And then within the scope of that, you can do things across a few verticals. Vision, which is, of course, most people kind of associate with self-driving cars. You have audio and natural language processing, which is the domain we're in. And then you just have general machine learning, which is just playing with data, right? So.
Yeah, so no, that's interesting. So let's dig deeper into the audio, and we'll do that in 1 second. Just wanted to give a reminder to everyone who's just tuning in. I am interviewing Derrick Johnson. Derrick is the founder, or the co-founder of Encounter AI. They're in Silicon Valley right now. I think they just went through a raise. They've raised some VC money. They help restaurants and other organizations, but particularly restaurants. They help them become faster, friendlier, and more efficient through the use of artificial intelligence. If you like this interview with Derrick, please go ahead and press the thumbs up button on YouTube. Exactly. And please go ahead and share this with other people who may be interested in this conversation. And please also subscribe to our channel, because we want to bring you as many smart, intelligent people who are talking about Black financial matters as possible. So on that note, let's get back into it, Derrick. Let's talk about the audio in terms of machine learning as applied to voice recognition, voice learning, those types of things. You're doing it for the fast food industry right now, the restaurant industry, to make it more efficient and faster and friendlier. Can you talk about other industries in which you may apply your same technology to in the future?
Definitely. So we're definitely looking at retail. I have a friend, she goes shopping often, and she brought up the fact that when she goes to the store, there's no consistency for dimensions in women's clothing, right? And so the byproduct there is that you may be a size 6 and a certain brand, but you go to a store and that changes across the board. How we're looking at potentially applying our technology for retail is just looking up inventory data, right? So, okay, you're in the store, your ordering associate that's there, or your retail associate, today they try to go to their point of sale system. They say, okay, hey, I can't help you, right? Because for the most part, those systems are legacy systems that have been there 5, 10 years, even 20 years in some instances that we've seen. But now how we look at augmenting it from an audio perspective is everyone has a headset or a walkie-talkie, right? Using same voice technology perspective, if that person was able to say, okay, hey, I have a customer here who historically wears, size X, brand X. Can you give me some suggestions that are actually in store that I can show them, right? And so over that same headset now comes these suggestions. And that retail associate can walk the customer around and find 3 or 4 items that matches for her. And now it's this magical experience that they don't have today, right? A lot of people reference the retail apocalypse, and most people, frankly, aren't talking about the fact that you can receive better customer service online today than you can in stores, right? And how do we now reinvigorate the stores with experiential experiences that now make those customers come back and give them a level of experience that they're willing to pay for?
Got you. And, that's very interesting that you talk about that. And I see that as the vision, as the dream, right? And there's the thing that gets you excited about being able to walk in the store and make that happen, which you just described. Then there's the actual experience of me trying to use my Google Pixel. My Google Pixel to make, accurate assessments of what I'm trying to say in terms of my voice as well, right? So, like, what's the time frame looking like to close that gap in terms of what you just laid out as the vision for the future, and then getting from there to where I can accurately even just get on my phone? And Google, of course, is one of the leaders of artificial intelligence.
Definitely.
Get on my phone and use it in the manner that you're talking about using it in retail.
Okay, so I'll give you a simple answer, then I'll try to go a bit complex, right? So the simple answer is, right now, I think accuracy around voice assistants are maybe 60, 70%. The product we're developing, we're around 85, 90%. And in particular, how they work today is across a few components, right? It breaks down into what most people identify as an intent, right? So you're saying, okay, set my alarm, what time is it? What time does my flight leave? Play my favorite song. These intents are all built based upon keywords, right? So if those keywords are heard correctly, the process starts. If those keywords aren't heard correctly, the process doesn't start, right? And you get the, hey, I can't understand you. Can you say it again? So on and so forth, right? Oftentimes, this speaks to the diversity in the data sets that they've actually used to build these technologies. As you know, African-American, Black people, we speak with a little bit of slang from time to time, right? That's not in data sets, right? So I know as a voice technology owner, when I say, hey, X, can you do this? And I'm talking in my natural conversational, like non-corporate voice, right? It has a problem. And then today I have to correct myself and speak to it correctly how the training data that it was developed on was probably trained. And then I get that recognition, right? And we've seen that across a variety of use cases. How we actually get to that perfect level that you're referring to is to actually build out models that inherently have multiple groups of speakers across a variety of social economic backgrounds in the training data. And so what we've actually done with Encounter AI is we've started with small college towns, right, that have intersections of immigrants, individuals that are born in those regions, individuals that are transplants. And so we get this cluster of conversation that gives us an upper hand, right? And because we're starting there, we're able to get a lot higher accuracy because, yes, you're getting, let's just say, a Big Mac or a Whopper, but like we're hearing that across so many dialects, so many inflection points, so many points of slang that we can correct that model such that it understands most of it, if not all of it, right? When we go back to, for example, your mobile phone, a small sample set is being used to drive that technology for, I think now billions of people, right? And so each time you think of it like that, just like me and you're going to have different blood types, right? Or just like me and you're going to have, different tonalities in our voice, that has to be taught to these systems to understand, such that we get to the level of accuracy and perfection that you're talking about in this dream ideal land, right? And that starts with the work that we're doing, just in terms of data collection and making sure that we're inclusive in how we capture information.
Yeah, and I want to dig deeper into that in 1 second, but first a quick commercial break with Derrick Johnson. Derrick is the founder of Encounter AI. They are an artificial intelligence company based, I believe, in Silicon Valley that is really disrupting the restaurant industry, making it friendlier, faster, and more efficient. If you like this video and like the discussion of artificial intelligence, please press the thumbs up button and make sure that you share this video with other people in your network. And also subscribe to the Black Financial channel to get more interviews like we're conducting today with Derrick as well. So I couldn't get out of here without talking about the dark side of AI and artificial intelligence.
Yes, please, let's
dig deep into that. And two things really come to mind. 2 or 3 things. One is related to bias in terms of like who is actually programming these systems, and like some inherent bias with artificial intelligence. Or even like, I think I read an article where self-driving cars have a more difficult time in seeing black folk than white people and people of other races. So you have things like that. You have robocalls abusing artificial intelligence, making all these calls at the exact same time, harassing people. Also, just this big undercurrent of potential unemployment, and how that's going to affect, let's even call it the fast food industry, where there's a disproportionate amount of people who are African American within that industry. Yes. So you have all these challenges, you have all these problems facing artificial intelligence. Let's just start one by one and kind of just talk through it. So let's first talk through the biggest issue. Actually, let's talk about the unemployment piece.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That artificial intelligence is apt to bring to the United States. What do you think about that, and what are some solutions do you think that can be implemented to, I guess, help not necessarily just stop it, but stop the bleeding a little bit?
Definitely. So first thing I want to acknowledge is ownership, right? We're on a financial network, right? Ownership, capitalism, communism, socialism. Those definitions all start with the means of ownership or the means of production are owned by X, right? So let's frame the conversation around that. When we talk about the implications of artificial intelligence for the labor market, first we need to talk about ownership. Who's going to own the future of labor? What does that look like? How is it deployed? And what are the externalities around how we now, what I would call, fix or retool society around this movement, right? So a few thoughts that we've given there is, one, of course, is I mentioned it being deflationary. And so the idea is that if we do it correct and it's owned by the right people, we should actually see services, goods, commerce become cheaper over time, right? So that means that as long as you're earning money, you won't need as much money to have the same level of service, right? That's premise number one. Premise number two is that, depending on what gospel or strategy you listen to, there's this idea that we have various levels of work that may be invaluable, right? And so the idea there is that if we're repurposing someone who's, for example, doing fast food today. So just to give you a quick stat, I think the stats are around, there's 130% to 150% churn for fast food workers, which means as soon as they enter the door, the likeliness of them leaving is guaranteed, right? Oftentimes for 5 to 10%, or 5 to 10 cent increases in their paycheck, right? You're going from $10.10 an hour to $10.20 an hour. And you're like, this isn't a career. Peace, I'm going across the street, right? And so those are the first things we're solving, is just around how do we allow businesses to deliver a consistent level of customer service by augmenting the labor that's there today, right? But then let's go back to the long-term implications of labor and what that means. I think if we're being honest, there's this grandiose world that we all want. People may call it utopian. We're going to stay away from, the brave new worlds and things like that. But the idea is that today I would love a one-to-one experience with my doctor for a few hours, empowered by artificial intelligence, more than I would want, 20 to 30 seconds with a fast food worker, right? How we provide bigger opportunities for things that we actually want and care about, I think is how we're going to have to transform society. We mentioned the healthcare system, teaching, right? How do I now bring artificial intelligence to an industry that's historically been low employment, that's been especially underserving in a lot of our communities, and augment that so it gets better? Those are where I see the technology is going, right? Whereas succinctly after that, the goal is to rise all boats with the intent that as long as we can make the gold standard of life better, I think everything gets better, right? The churn and burn is going to happen. We're going to lose employment here. We're going to lose employment there, right? Today, no artificial intelligence is being deployed in the retail industry, and we're seeing a retail apocalypse, right? So the idea is that it's going to happen anyway. If we don't figure out how to repurpose and reallocate talent, both labor as well as resources, to institutions and experiences that people want, like, it's going to go by the wayside anyway, right? Artificial intelligence didn't destroy Sears, right? It didn't destroy a lot of the stores that you see closing today. Lack of customer demand did, right? Our goal is by using artificial intelligence, we can actually empower the stores that are staying open. My goal as a restaurant owner was I wanted to keep my lights open, right? I wanted to build solutions that allowed me to now have 3 people and have them service the whole store like it would be if it was 5 people, right? That was the difference between me letting go of those 3 people or keeping those 3 people, right? And so that fighting chance was what I wanted to bring to the table and felt like technology was the medium to make that happen. I don't see it being all doom and gloom. I think a lot of the things that we're putting value on, are going to be respective. Let's go back to the automotive conversation. Some people want to go hop in their Corvette, press the gas, feel the horsepower, and drive down the highway, right? Some people want the luxury life and to sit in the back of a car and go from point A to point B. Those two worlds are never going to align, right? You can't give me an Uber if I want to drive in my Corvette. The same thing is going to, I believe, be the outcome of this next industrial rave. We're going to create solutions for people. If you just want a sandwich and you don't want these high touch levels of service and you want it for 99 cents, there's going to be a lane for that, right? And then if you want the opulent touches and high touch and high cost food and all organic everything, so on and so forth, there's going to be a lane for that. And you're going to choose what you want based upon your customer appetite, right? And those industries are going to be staffed appropriately based upon that customer demand, right? I don't see us going to an era where we have all of this unemployment. And that's, for me, that's my general thought point around labor and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, no, that sounds interesting. And, I agree with a lot of those things that you mentioned in terms of, who's going to own the means of production, right? So, you talk about capitalism where, private investors own that. And, I'm getting out of my realm, but, communism where the state owns it and so on and so forth.
And socialism is the people.
Yeah. So, you think about that. And I think that there's going to come a point to where we're going to have to make a decision as a society, especially as it relates to, let's say, driving and using the use of artificial intelligence to create self-driving cars and the like, right? Many studies have shown that, having both self-driving only cars will probably make our lives a lot safer. But having self-driving cars mixed with human drivers who are prone to making additional errors will make us less safe, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So if that is the case, the only way that self-driving cars will be this utopian vision is if everyone is almost forced or is, very suggestively persuaded to, move over to the self-driving, piece. So I'm extrapolating out, so I don't know what that's going to look like in terms of, how it affects the taxi industry. I mean, think about how up in arms they are over just Uber existing, right? Now you're talking about even taking away the Uber jobs and all the taxi jobs. I guess no one really knows how it's going to look. And that's the position that I come from. But, I think it's important for us to have the right people in place in terms of, politicians and business leaders who understand these problems and who are willing to make those ethical decisions that are necessary to push forward. Because I don't know, like I'm thinking about this whole all tides rise or all tides or the tide rises all boats or lifts all boats. I don't know if that has ever happened. And,
never. It's never happened.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's going to happen.
I mentioned the ownership part of it, right? Because I can specifically speak for African American and Black communities, right? Like we haven't really owned a lot of things, right? To Dove's point on the taxi conversation, my father was a taxi cab driver for a short amount of time, and his goal was to get a medallion, right? He's like, hey, Derrick, if I can get this medallion, like this changes everything because I now have the power to have people work for me. I own a variety of taxi cabs in the city, and this is guaranteed wealth creation, right? That was the purpose of why people were, why taxi cab owners were against Uber and Lyft, et cetera, was because that was their investment. No different than, if you're a corporate employee, you may put in, into your employee stock option plan, or you may put into your 401k. For taxi cab drivers, getting a medallion was their proverbial 401k plan, right? And so when these concepts came about, it wasn't the fact that they were taking people from A to B more efficient than them. For them, it was the loss of wealth, right? Because oftentimes you may buy a taxi cab medallion for $1 million plus in a city like Chicago, and now that investment, exponentially lost its value. And there's no way to mitigate that, right? You can't say, okay, hey, it was an investment, so let me make that right for you, right? It's just the scope of doing business. And so I agree all day with why they were adamant about, preventing the change from happening. However, again, I think it's back to those principles of what does ownership look like, right? Now that these companies are coming to IPO, imagine if Yellow Cab would have said, let me get 1% equity. You see what I'm saying? All of the small co-ops that are oftentimes immigrant-led and minority-led in these cities, if they said, let me get a percentage of stock and let me give you my cab and taxi fleet, right? We're talking about $30 billion IPOs that are about to happen, right? Like you still would have got the same outcome if you held onto that taxi cab medallion. And so I think oftentimes when people look at these ideas, they don't understand the inherent long-term benefit that they may bring to the table, right? And I think oftentimes if you can be inclusionary in that ownership principle, like get in and understand what it means for you and don't discount what it means for the globe, right? Again, south side of Chicago, I couldn't get a taxi downtown after a certain hour, 5 years ago. And so like, we're not even talking decades ago, we're talking 5 years ago, right? And so like my Uber is practically guaranteed, right? That level of service, no one cared to offer me. And that's the difference is like they brought a service that was guaranteed for all socioeconomic backgrounds, right? As long as there was a driver near you, you were guaranteed a ride, right? And so the taxi cab never offered that, right? And so I don't think that it was fair for them to have those positionings because that level of service that was brought to market was beneficial for a lot more people. And that's, I think, what made them valuable.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that you are 100% correct with that. In terms of a lot of times, like people are complaining now, or taxi drivers are complaining now, since their fundamental business model is being threatened, but they weren't really complaining when black people couldn't get a taxi on the south side of Chicago or the west side of Chicago or wherever.
Or downtown, right? Like
downtown. Yeah, or downtown. Exactly. Where they're
like
at.
It wasn't even the hoods. Like downtown, yeah. Like, hey, I'm here. They're like, see you later,
peace. Right? Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense. But it also just talks to it makes me think about this concept of discrimination and unconscious bias with programming, and who is actually programming these algorithms and this artificial intelligence and this machine learning, and how that can potentially affect the Black community, positive or negatively. Most of the time, it's negatively if you think about it.
Well, we're seeing a lot of things come out.
Yeah, I mean, the things that I think about is, one is loans, loan applications. Are you going to pay more money because you're Black? Going back to that type of life with redlining loans, that type of thing. Police, if police start using AI and confirmation bias on that particular front, and so on and so forth. So can you talk about like just the ramifications or just the, what's happening on that front, and the need and the importance of having a diverse group of programmers when it comes to deploying this AI technology?
Right. So just gives the audience some background. Essentially, how artificial intelligence works is the data you give it, it holds as the gospel truth, and it makes predictions on that data. Right. So if we talk about something like, you mentioned arrest and police, right? Inherently, we know that Black and brown people are policed at a much higher rate than our counterparts. And what that means is that if someone built a system off of the data that was there today, that system would just reinforce what's happening today, right? So yes, the officer didn't make the decision, but the machine that made the decision was largely based on an unfair system that we know inherently impact us in a negative way, right? And so we would just be perpetuating that cycle to continue, just removing the human element from it. The power of bringing diverse developers and thought leaders to the table is that they can actually change how those systems are developed, right? So, when I talk about artificial intelligence and prediction in the form of the legal system, right? Imagine if agnostic of the crime, and the hue of the person, economic background, everyone got the same sentencing, right? That's what a machine would do. There would be no difference than if you were from the affluent community or if you were from, the inner city, right? Like at the end of the day, you would get the same sentencing, right? And each decision path in that roadmap would influence that outcome. Same thing with self-driving cars. We're seeing information come out saying that it's a higher propensity for it to hit a person of color than it is for Caucasian counterparts, right? And largely this is, if you look at a city like San Francisco, if you look at a city like Denver or the outskirts of Las Vegas, where they're testing the early generations of this technology, if you put, millions upon millions of hours into a system and you've never seen a Black person, logically, it doesn't know how to react in that scenario. I previously mentioned that it's primarily prediction, right? So if I've never seen a Black person or a person of color, and my goal when I don't see what's identified as a pedestrian is acceleration, I don't know from a system perspective that this person of color is a person. It's never been taught to me that this is a person. And so the byproduct is that the system is not going to slow down, right? Because it hasn't identified this as a person. And I think we've seen a lot of the earlier ramifications just around search engines, right? There were stories where I think Black people were associated with monkeys and things like that because, again, the individuals that made these systems didn't take that into account, right? And didn't have the people in the room or the influence of the people in the room to change those decisions from happening, right? And it's a lot of work being done on the forefront by a lot of companies today who are trying to change those biases, right? But I think the best way to do it is for the people who those systems impact to create those solutions, right? I often think about the fact that, most inner cities have been called food deserts, right? Because there's no restaurants or grocery stores willing to come to those markets and build up stores because historically it hasn't been profitable. Now, when we take things like Amazon Go or self-checkouts, these solutions are now viable for those neighborhoods, right? So that's what excites me about this new wave is the fact that capabilities that we couldn't have done before that weren't economically feasible, we can now do, but as you mentioned, there is that dark side, right? There is that if we're not in tune with what's being built and influencing that to at least have our best interest at heart, ultimately there's a strong propensity for it to affect us.
Love it. And thanks for the thoughtful answer on this particular subject. So today we've been with Derrick Johnson, who is the founder of Encounter AI. They are disrupting the restaurant space, making fast food restaurants friendlier, faster, and more efficient. So Derrick, if people want to get in touch with you to know more about what you're doing, how can they reach you?
Definitely. So EncounterAI.com is the website. Encounter AI on most social media channels. If you're trying to reach me directly, you can do hello@EncounterAI.com, or I'm on social media, Instagram, Derrick L. Johnson, Twitter, Derrick L. Johnson, the same. And so you can reach me on all of those channels. I respond to messages. And, I'm here for the community, right? If I can be of help, whether you're trying to raise VC, whether you need intros, whether you want to learn about artificial intelligence, whether your kids thinking about going into computer technology and they need mentors, like I've done all of that. I continue to do all of that. If this interview has interested you, definitely reach out.
Love it. So if you like this interview today, please go ahead and press the thumbs up button.
There we go.
Exactly. And please share this interview with your friends and family who may be interested in artificial intelligence as a career as well, or just want to know more about the subject. Also, please make sure that you check out the Black Business School, who was the sponsor of this interview. So the Black Business School, where we don't just help you climb a corporate ladder, we help you build one too. The Black Business School helps African Americans obtain a culturally relevant yet practical education in all things wealth building at a price they can afford. So whether you want to take a class on real estate investing, stock market investing, or just small business entrepreneurship in general, we have classes for you. So please head over to theblackbusinessschool.com. So on behalf of Mr. Derrick Johnson, I am Lawrence Watkins, founder and CEO of Great Black Speakers and the president and chief operating officer of the Black Business School. Everyone take care, be blessed, and have a great day. Thanks for tuning in.